In this video, I'll go through the process of creating my albedo texture map for my 3D model. So in my case, I'm making the texture map for my M1 assault rifle. And you can see that I have two texture materials so far, which is the metal and the wood. Both of these were obtained through a website called textures.com, which is a great place to obtain your own textures. So I do recommend signing up to start downloading textures today. So first things first is I'm going to start off with the wood texture here. Now, it's always good to work off a reference image or to have something to compare within the real world. So for instance, if you are making a gun or a sci-fi gun, for instance, it's good to look at, say, real world examples of those. So just to kind of make sure that your object will look as realistic as possible, unless you're going for intentional sort of over exaggerated or stylized look. But in my case, I'm trying to be as realistic as possible, so I know that, for instance, these areas here need to be wood, some areas will have to be metal. So this will be my base texture so far. So this gun stock, for instance, would be made out of one piece of wood, so I want to reduce the tiling as much as possible. So I think two sets of tiles here will be enough to cover this area here. And once I've tiled those, I can just merge them together, and I can then start deleting these areas here. So I can go to my lasso tool, which is basically our selection tool, and just quickly go around these areas really quickly. Then go to select, invert, and just delete those areas. So now I just have the texture over that particular UV shell. Now, if you want to duplicate, a really quick way of duplicating, rather than just pressing the right mouse button and duplicate, if you hold on Alt and just click and drag, it can easily just create a new copy of that layer very quickly and very efficiently. So right now I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees to make this cover this particular area, because again, this UV shell is pointing vertically rather than horizontally, so the wood would also have to would also be facing horizontally as well. Otherwise, it would look kind of weird in 3D. So for instance, luckily this, I can probably go back to Maya really quick and just double check what this area actually covers. So it's also good to have sort of Maya and Photoshop up at the same time, so I can see, yep, this covers all this area here. Double check what this part is. Okay, so most of this I can essentially cover with the wood texture. And again, really quickly, I'm just going to delete the areas that I don't need. So essentially, you need to go through the process of making sure that you are cleaning up your texturing as you go along. If you ever look at normal maps or diffuse maps, etc. online, you'll see that they are very clean and the textures only cover what they need to cover. Making sure it's not overlapping. I think for now I'll be okay with that. I do know that there's some metals in there, for instance, but right now we're not going to fuss about it too much. I'm going to duplicate this again, hide that, and then I'm going to just quickly do this particular part here. I may also want to flip this vertically, just so it kind of matches up, because again, this is all the same piece of wood, so it might all tile across the same way. Just make sure it lines up. Merge these together, and it's just a case of me cleaning up these the texture really quick. can be a time-consuming process, but it will be worth it in the end. Oops, kind of a bit of error there, but I think so. Select inverse delete. Okay. I think for the purpose of this video, this should be okay. So I'm going to just merge those. Probably call this the gun stock wood. And then really quickly, I'm just going to cover some of the areas here at the bottom. So I know for a fact that most of this area is going to be metal at the bottom. So I could essentially just cover this entire area just with the metal texture, like so. Okay, so for instance, we have approximately, say, 40% of this UV setup. If you look at my albedo really quick, you can see that I've got it all complete here. So for now, let's just assume that we've covered the entire thing. Now, it's good that we have the base texture there, but you'll notice with a lot of surfaces that there are going to be some sort of small little details or decals that might be on surfaces. So for instance, maybe that might be some dirt, or for instance maybe some scratches, or hell, even maybe some graffiti, for instance. So maybe on this gun I might want to put some dirt that kind of signifies that this gun has seen some action or has been in use for some time now. It's not a brand new gun that just came out the assembly line. So what I might want to do is I might go to File, Open. I'm going to open up some of my decals that I have saved on my textures folder. So I have some nice dirt that I could kind of play around with, for instance. So I can probably go on this little decal here. And this is a PNG right now, so I'm going to bring this over to my UVs. Put this at the top here. Just going to quickly merge these two together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just reduce this down in size a little bit. And may even just rotate it around. And again, you can do that by pressing Ctrl T, which allows you to rotate. And if you hold on Shift, you can scale down uniformly as well. So for instance, I might just have some dirt at the back of the gun here, like so. And I might want to play around. So right now, it kind of does feel like there's just an image on top of another image right now. So it's always good to use the filter options, because again, they kind of change how different layers interact with one another. So right now I'll multiply, and already this looks like it's dirt that's actually on the wood. It looks a lot better than the first one, which was just normal, which just immediately feels like it's just an image on top of another one. So for instance, I could go with multiply, which I think does a pretty decent job at the moment, or just playing around with the different filters by pressing the up and down keys. So for instance, there's screen, color dodge, which kind of looks like the wood's been chipped away a little bit to expose the original wood. Or like overlay, for instance, which has actually got a pretty good job actually. Soft light or even hard light, for instance. Me personally, I might actually keep it with the multiply actually, and what I can do is I can turn on the opacity, which is basically like the transparency, for instance. So rather than have it at full 100, I may want to just kind of slightly seep it in a little bit. What I might do as well is I may even just select some areas of this dirt texture. If I go back to normal, for instance, really quick. Select the Magic Wand tool. I'm gonna deselect most of this area here. I'm thinking right now is that maybe I can make these areas a little bit darker actually. So if we're a normal, if I multiply for instance, maybe adjust the brightness and contrast a little bit. So you see now that I've kind of played around with it. So these areas here now are much more stronger than before. And again, I can probably duplicate this as well. To some areas around here. Put that back to multiply. And already I've added some decals here, which really does bring this model to life. One other thing that I could do as well is, for instance, if I go to the metal area here, and if I go to, say, I think for instance, we'll just use this area here. Maybe I want to put some sort of an emboss in there, for instance. So what I could do is I can put some text in here. And what I will write is, I'll just put in some numbers for now. So 1, 4, 3, 5, for instance, just some random numbers. What I'll do is, if I click on the right mouse button and go to blend options, what I can do is I can give this some options. So for instance, we have the bevel and emboss, which basically creates like a 3D effect to our text or to our image, for instance. And I can even give it, say, a shadow as well, which again I can just play around with the opacity, for instance. And the bevel, I'll just leave it as it is for now. The reason why I want to embevel is because you might see that sometimes on, say, metal, someone might have like an embossed or have some dents in, say, the metal, which kind of like scratches in, say, words or text, for instance. So right now it just looks like it's just some numbers on top of the metal. But what I can do is, if I turn on the fill, for instance, what that does is that it gets rid of the original texture, but it keeps the effects on. So for instance, if I turn on the opacity, the whole thing is turned down to 0. But the fill, for instance, it keeps the effects active. So I can turn this down, and already this feels like it is embossed within the texture. So I can go back to the blend options, for instance, and play around with some of these attributes. So again, I can change the angle, the size, soften it up a little bit, maybe the depth, maybe even the shadow as well. I can probably increase the shadow size a little bit, or maybe just get rid of it entirely even. And you can see already that I've just added that little bit of an emboss, which adds a lot more detail to it, which you could continue adding to get something like this. So if I go to my folder right now, you can see that I have some scratches that are all over this wood. Turn that back on and off again, so you can see very subtle areas that have got some scratches in there. Again, that's the key word, subtlety. It just adds a great amount of depth and detail to your weapon. It can actually help to tell it a story as well. You can see here as well that I have some writing here. Again, using the same emboss elements to it. So again, play around with the filter options. You can even play around with the blend options as well to kind of add in those great amount of details to your albedo map. So what I would say right now is start covering all your UVs up with the base texture, which would be, say, the wood, metal or rock, for instance, and start adding in those higher details. So for instance, if it's a brick wall, for instance, add in moss, add in, say, graffiti, blend it in, make it feel natural. Maybe some of the bricks are lighter in detail or darker in areas. It's up to you. Play around and experiment with the options in Photoshop to make your textures look and feel interesting and realistic.